Good morning, everyone. Shavua Tov. It's good to see the brave people who keep coming in to hold the bagel. I did ask this morning, why do bagels have holes in them? I really don't know the answer to that. Some people here suggested things, but I'm not entirely convinced. I'm still pondering about it, and if anyone knows the official answer, let us know, okay? So, as we get our bagels and as we're sitting down and filling our coffee cups, maybe we can say the blessing for studying Torah together, because will be a session of traditional Torah study, in the sense that we'll be following the text from Parshat Shavua and try to kind of like have a discussion about it together. And I will say that when we started Hold of the Bagel, we said it's going to be an intellectual and cultural salon, loosely based on the Jewish calendar, Parshat Shavua, the holiday. Sometimes it's more loose, sometimes it's less loose, right? Today it's going to be really about Parshat Shavua. So let us say the blessing together as we make this intention for a deep, meaningful, fruitful, friendly Torah study session together. Baruch Ata Adonai Eloheinu Melech HaOlam Asher Kideshanu B'mitzvotav V'tzivanu La'asot Torah. And of course, welcome to our friends who are on Zoom. I see they're all coming fashionably late, which is very good. So, Parshat Vayerah is the fourth. Yeah, if everybody on Zoom, please mute yourself. Let me see how we do that. You're just gonna have to mute yourselves, please, unless when you're speaking. So, Parshat Vayerah is the fourth parasha of Bereshit. Roughly speaking, the first two parashot, Bereshit and Noah, are describing the universal story of the creation of the world, of humankind. And as we've pointed out a couple of times this year, in our tradition, it's been rabbis of all generations have stressed time and again how important it is that the Bible doesn't start with the story of the Jewish people, right? The perspective, the overall perspective that religion has is not about one people. It's about the world and the entire human race. I think that's really important basically for everything we do. As we struggle to in every generation, different, same but different, as they say, right? To find the place of the Jewish people amongst the nations and in this world, right? It's really important to always remember that in the end, the core beginning and essence of our religion is about some kind of a global, universal concept, right? That is not limited just to the well-being or to the interests of our people, although, you have to also take care of your own family and your own people. That's fine, right? That's okay, and it's actually more than okay. It's needed. We have a place among the nations, and we have to take care of that. That's also important. But as we do that, it's also very important to remember in the back and the fronts of our heads that our Bible doesn't start with, the Israelites in Egypt or something like that. It starts with the story of the creation of the world, of humankind. It's going to be relevant to our conversation later on. You'll see how to balance these things maybe. So then, Lech Lecha, the portion that we read yesterday on Shabbat, there was a very nice bar mitzvah here of Justin Wackerman. He read beautifully. And Lech Lecha is basically the beginning of the story of our people, but it's actually also broader. Because Abraham is the spiritual patriarch not only of the Jewish people, right? He's basically considered by Jews, Christians, and Muslims as the beginner of this big eureka moment that he had, right? Which is, this big deal, this big invention of monotheism, right? This idea that everything is connected and interrelated, and there is one divine source that kind of like connects all everything, right? Rather than seeing the world, the universe, as you know, led by competing forces, right? That are different to one another. Bless you. Please mute yourself. Abraham realized. Abraham realized that for some reason I can't mute people. Oh, now I can. I'm gonna start muting you all. I'm like the omnipotent God. I can mute people, unmute people. Right? So this is what Abraham discovered, right? He discovered this really big deal that there's a power, a source that is the origin of all things, and all things, good, bad, this, other, opposites, everything comes from the same places, and therefore everything is connected. And according to many readings of this, not only did Abraham understand that this force exists in the world, he discovered that this force exists within him, right? And not just in him, in every human being, right? That somehow that force is accessible, is you can partner with it as a human being, okay? So he was, and if you read Lech Lecha and Vayerah, and the other portions, when we look at Abraham, we see that basically he was experimenting with that new force. Okay, he was really making a lot of experiments, right? Following the Zoharic interpretation of Lech Lecha, go search within. Lech Lecha, in Hebrew it can be translated to go and look inside. That we can learn sometime on Wednesdays, right? But basically, if you really read the stories of Lech Lecha and Vayerah, the wanderings of Abraham throughout the Holy Land, he was wandering geographically in the Holy Land, from the north to the south, from the east to the west. Sometimes he went to Egypt and he came back. But all these wanderings, all these journeys were also spiritual and ethical journeys, okay? Which you can see that he was really trying to like push the limits. Imagine that, see, he just discovered God. Okay, it's a big deal. It's like, imagine nowadays, it's like all of a sudden we have AI, right? Like a really big invention that wasn't there before. Let's think of another example, right? I don't know, the smartphone. So, what's that? Refrigeration. Well, yes. What's more important, God or refrigeration? If you had to choose one, probably refrigeration, right? Right. So really, imagine that all of a sudden there's computers. All of a sudden there's, you know what, an H bomb, nuclear power. All of it, right? Sometimes there's these discoveries, these inventions that humankind discovers, and it's so great and grand that it kind of shakes everything up, right? All the turmoil that we see nowadays, some attributed to the digital era and to the information revolution, right? The data revolution. We have invented such powerful machines, and we don't know what to do with it. It confuses us. It advances us, but it also puts us on a roller coaster that we can hardly contain, because we don't know how to adapt our morals and our ethics to this changing reality. So imagine Abraham, who discovered God, or invented God. You can, whatever way you want to look at it, right? And it takes a while to realize what to do with this new invention. So you can kind of look at Abraham, if you go home and you read Lech Lecha and Vayerah and all those Parshiot in Bereshit, in Genesis, where Abraham and Sarah and Hagar, they're all wandering about as kind of like radical experimentations with this new invention. A lot of it has to do with morality, with ethics. Okay? If I understand that in me, there is this amazing force, that is the force that creates everything. And, Abraham had a very direct relationship with that force. They would talk like they're pals almost. You'll see soon. God comes, hey, how are you? Let me share something with you. Oh, all right. I'm going to destroy all the people of Sodom and Gomorrah because they're bad. Oh, really? Oh, that's interesting. When are you doing that? Oh, no, my cousin lives there. Don't do it. It's kind of like that, right? Like I really like, hi, pal, how are you? Right? So then, if you look at different stories of Abraham, you see that he was really every time it's like he pushes it to one limit to see how far he can push against this new force that he's integrating into his life. So at a certain point, you know, Brit Ben Habetarim in Lech Lecha, where he dissects animals and walks in the middle of them. Somebody knows this, right? So Abraham was really, for example, he was really interested about where is it exactly that if there's a point, a divine point in the middle of our souls. Let's say we meditate and we say, find that point in your heart that is the origin of light and all those things that we say, right? Where is it exactly? Is it in our? Is it here? Is it here? Is it here? He was really so. So he took a few animals. God told him to do that. Like two. I don't remember exactly. 2 pigeons, 3 cows, whatever. I don't forget the list. And dissected them exactly in the middle. Okay, and made like a corridor. It's in the Bible. Okay, and kind of walked between it. You see, he was searching for that middle point. Like, where is it? And then he made a covenant with God. Well, he was standing, kind of gory, right? I see the shocked faces, right? The Bible isn't for children. Don't teach it. Never teach the Bible to children. It's a very gory book. Unfortunately, to me, in first grade, they taught me that story, but it took me years to recover. I don't think I was recovered, actually. Okay, so, but the spiritual understanding is that he was really searching. He was experimenting. He was experimenting. Then the story that then he goes and he tells his wife is not his wife. You know that story in Egypt. He goes and he says, "Oh, he was afraid that the king will." So he's also experimenting the different things about relationships. Let's say that my wife is my sister, so that the king won't kill me. So that the king took her, but then weird things. It happened twice to Abraham, 2 different kings. Okay, so so really also, so how did that affect relationships, for example? And who should I put first? Myself or my significant other? Also some experiment. Maybe to us, we already know this because 3,000 years have passed, but he was he was experimenting. Then, the famous story that is also in our portion, although we're not going to focus on it today, the Akedah. What happens when that force tells me to go and sacrifice my kid? Right? Radical experimentations, all through and through. Okay, when he was trying to push to the limit. All right, so think about it. There's you and there's God. There's your rationale self, your being, your brain, your whatever you can know and say about the world. And then there's this force that when you connect to it, it tells you to do things. Sometimes they're weird things. Okay? And all this is kind of like a little intro to the text from Parashat Vayerah that I'm hoping to share with you today. Okay? It exists in Genesis chapter 18. Okay? Genesis chapter 18. And it is the story that we actually read in Rosh Hashanah, the second day. It's an optional reading from the Torah for the second day of Rosh Hashanah. And this year we read it, and our student rabbi, not Cantor Braun, but student rabbi not Renata. That's a confusing part to me. I was surrounded with Renatas, and I thought that I should change my name to Ornata just to fit in. But I didn't. I kept my name. I really did keep my name, and I'm still a Rabbi Or Zohar, as far as I know. Although in the spirit of radical changes, who knows? Maybe experiments. Maybe I should see. But anyways, at any rate, okay. So the beginning of Vayerah, which we're not reading, is that that thing when the angels came and promised Sarah that she'll have a child, and she was, no, I'm like 1,000 years old, I can't have children anymore. again, radical experimentation, right? How can people who are, post-menopause have children? But Abraham was, radical experimentation, and somehow it worked. And then right after that, look what it says here on page, not page, on verse 16. No, 17. And the Lord said, shall I conceal from Abraham what I'm doing? Possibly you have a different, if you're following the books, it might be a possible different translation, so maybe that could be helpful to us. If you see that the translation says something different, let us know, the ones who are following in the book. All right, so we see that God, the Lord, is basically expressing here that Abraham is like his bestie, right? He's like bringing him to the back office. Yeah, I'm not. Since this guy discovered me and realized that I exist in the world, he's like, I was there for like 1 billion years and no one noticed. Now somebody noticed, right? Let's be besties, and I really like let me like bring him to the back office and reveal to him what am I going to do with like different things and different divine projects that I have as God, okay? And Abraham will become a great and powerful nation, and all the nations of the world will be blessed in him. In case that you're wondering what our roles in the spiritual sons and daughters of Abraham and Sarah is, that's our purpose. Our purpose is to become a great nation, but not so that we will be blessed. Okay? We become a great nation when we are a blessing to other nations. That's our purpose, at least in theory. I will not say that we always live up to that necessarily. Like, who can, really? It's a nice thought. Like, oh, I'll be a blessing to all the nations, right? Easier said than done. Okay, I see that there's some questions in the room, so I'll pause my train of thought here for a moment, and let's hear here, yeah. So there's a technical request from the people on Zoom. They said that when they're on Zoom and then the people who ask questions don't have a microphone, they can't hear it. So now we're gonna use, you have to press the button. Try. No?
Green light's on. There we go.
All right.
Okay, so to whom is the Lord speaking in line 17?
That's a great question.
Doesn't have a great answer.
It looks like it's like a narrator thing, right? It looks like there's an aside, right? There's an aside. If I vaguely remember that term from Theater 101, like college. That all of a sudden the narrator is kind of like letting God speak to us, right? Not directly to Abraham. And it's actually a very good question to analyze the biblical stories from a point of view of like literature and theater. Unrelated, I once noticed that almost every episode in the Bible has like 2 or 3 characters in it, no more. Which made me think that maybe before it was a written text. It's just, I never read this anywhere. It's just my intuition that maybe before it was a written text, it was like a little traveling theater of like, but it didn't have a lot of budget, so it was like just 2 actors, and they were like, yeah, usually it's like just 2 people talking, and right, possibly. It's a very interesting thing. It's a very good point. Thank you. Like, who is this? It's not like you're talking to. I will not. Like the omnipresent narrator is saying, the Lord said this and that to us, to the readers. Yeah. I think it's already on. You just have to just.
So why is God asking a question? So the only time that like I really remember another question from him was Adam and Eve when they were hiding or trying to conceal themselves. But so why would God ask a question?
It's almost like, why would God lift a stone, create a stone that God can't lift, right? God asks questions in the Bible. By the way, there are many gods in the Bible, right? The God of Genesis is not the God of Joshua, is not the God of Jeremiah, is not the God of Isaiah, right? There's different, God evolves throughout the Bible because the Bible has been written throughout about 1,000 years, right? So more ancient parts of the Bible would reflect a certain understanding of God, and others would reflect another. Okay, but yes, God in the Bible not only asks questions. There are other examples, as far as I know, and also God, God gets offended, God gets angry, God gets, God has emotions, God has a body, by the way. Yeah, God of the Bible is not this obscure thing that they taught us about, like later on. It's almost like it's like a person, almost a character. It's really a character in the play. Interesting, very interesting, maybe shocking to some of us. So God can ask questions, God can have answers. Here I think it's almost like, but actually here I think it's like a rhetorical question. He basically is saying, I'm not concealing anything from Abraham. I'm not. Therefore, I'm not concealing anything from Abraham. He's my bestie. And I know that the purpose why we're having this relationship, because I want his offsprings, whether genetic or spiritual, right, to become a blessing to all the nations around them. Therefore, I'm going to bring you into the back office so that I can explain to him something that I'm going to do. Yeah.
Do I have to press anything?
No.
No. Okay. So, and I'm not sure, I don't want to interrupt the flow of your.
I already forgot what I was going to say.
Okay, good. Good. So in 18, that seems to me like a preview of what we see later. And we also, I noticed, read on the high holidays from Deuteronomy, it's really the city on a hill passage that suggests that the rest of the world will look to this nation or to us, and they'll want to be like us. And that has gotten us, if we go down millennia to the United States, into a lot of trouble, right? It's both a commandment, right? You should be so that the world will admire you, or Abraham, you will offer this blessing to the rest of the world, right? But it's also gotten us into a lot of trouble. They want to be like us.
Yes, it did. It does.
Okay.
Right? It's kind of like we're held. Sometimes we feel like we're held to a double standard, right? Or that there's kind of like can't we just be like any obscure other nation that nobody cares about somewhere, like in, you know what I mean? It kind of seems that either we bring ourselves or the world brings us, or that's what maybe we think that, and maybe it's like this grandeur complex that keeps us in trouble, or yes or no. Just to say that I read somewhere that, in fact, research showed that only 1 to 1.5% of Americans changed their vote or based their vote in the previous election about anything that has to do with Israel at all. And that just a second, and that in the end, Jews and Muslims in America vote the same, 2/3 Democrat, 1/3 Republican. And though, in other words, even though we may, so it also gives me kind of like these numbers give me an aha moment that maybe we're not as important as we think that we are. In other words, maybe we think that everybody cares about the Middle East and about Israel and about the Jews and about blah, 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 but actually, 99% of Americans don't care. And they vote because of the economy and because like 1,000 other things. And even like in foreign policy, they care more about the Ukraine, for example, than we, because we think it's so important, but actually, we're not important. Maybe to me, it's almost like a relief. It's like, oh, all that noise, and in the end, it's like people care because, there's like 1.2 inflation more or something like that, and their bank account is a little emptier, so they vote for somebody else. Something that is totally irrelevant to all this story that we're reading. Yeah, okay, let's go. Can we go?
I wasn't actually thinking about Israel.
Okay.
I was thinking about the United States and how this is my thing, but when the Puritans come to North America, they think they're carrying out this Abrahamic promise, and that it is the United States that will be the great and powerful. Well, it's not the United States yet, it'll be America, be where they are. Well, fast forward to Vietnam, then, you know, they
Got
want to be
you.
like us. That's
I need to apologize. So the little Israeli in me that always think that it's all about Israel. So again, you probably that would be a very good lecture for you to give in a future hole of the bagel, and I mean it seriously. And you know that we're in discussion about that. Yes, part of what's interesting about America is that when people who are again this not only the Jews saw themselves as the spiritual children of Abraham and Sarah. Okay, it kind of succeeded in the way that Christians, right, said we are the new Israel, right, and many groups, not just the Puritans, as far as I know, and I really don't know so much about this, right, but the little that I know is that many groups who came, for example, to this country saw this country as the new Israel and this country as a fulfillment. And yes, there is and maybe we're American Jews, to that matter, are like caught in a double complex of grandeur. It's like, you know, two points in your, psychological assessment. We feel as we belong to an ancient nation that is like a special kid on the block, God's bestie. And we also happen to be living in a country that has some kind of a complex, thinking that it's supposed to be the leader of the free world or something like that. Right? And maybe it does. I don't know. Right? So really, these are very good comments. Yeah, should we take more comments or should I go with my, a little bit more with my, like I was like having hopes to get to like verse 18, 19, 20, but you guys are like, admit the person. Admit the person into the madhouse, so people who think that they're God's chosen people, right? Mm-hmm.
The Latter-day Saints.
No, you have to use the mic.
The Latter-day Saints view the United States, I think, as the new Israel. Do they now?
Yes, and anybody who hasn't seen the famous play, Book of Mormon, go see it and then talk to me afterwards, because I thought it was the most hilarious play. It's also very deeply profound and amazing. So, yes, and there are many other examples. It's not just them, the people. I love this. People on Zoom, please mute yourself as you join us. That will be very, very kind of you. Probably should also share the screen with you, the text. It's so very kind of me. There's like all those things that we have to do. Never taught me all these things in rabbinic school, by the way. How to share a screen, how to navigate a conversation that's happening in more than one realm, physically and then. Okay. So now okay. All right, so let's attempt to continue a little bit. I think some of the people here are curious about how this continues. All right, so for I have known him because he commands his sons and his households after him that they should keep the way of the Lord, to perform righteousness and justice, in order that the Lord bring upon Abraham that which he spoke concerning him. Right? So God is saying this guy it's not only he's kind of like educating his children, right? With the bar tabam, to follow the way of the Lord and just realize that there's no Torah yet. What is the way of the Lord? Back then. There's no, like the Ten Commandments haven't been invented yet. All right? The mitzvot don't exist. There's no Shabbat. There's no, nothing, okay? It's kind of curious. What are the ways of the Lord at this point when the God was like invented 2 minutes ago and Abraham is just, walking about, experimenting with, animals and things, right? So you see what I mean? It's all very raw, but already God has this vision for Abraham. And now finally we come to our story. And the Lord said, since the cry of Sodom and Gomorrah has become great, and since their sin has become very grave, I will descend now and see whether according to her cry, which has come to me, they have done, I will wreak destruction upon them, and if not, I will know. That's a nice God, right? As we're brought into, after this little, exposition, when, we're going to be God's besties, and we're going to have to follow the ways of the Lord, and how nice this all is, the blessing, all the nations will be a blessing, right? Now we're brought into the back office, and we are shared, God's plan, what to do with the people of Sodom, who are very sinful. in this very verse, they don't even bother to tell us what is the sin. Later in chapter 19 they do, but not here. Okay? And then what is God's plan for Sodom and Gomorrah? What's that? Destroy it. How? With fire falling from the heavens, right? And destroying, turning it into like a unlivable desert. Okay? So sulfur and fire ended up falling on from the heavens on Sodom and Gomorrah and basically wiping and annihilating them. All right? This is our nice little God here, right? This is what he's. Sorry, I shouldn't speak like that to God. It's disrespectful. Okay, so this is this God. Now that we're in the in crowd, right? We're in the executive board meeting, right? This is actually what God wants to do. All right. I will descend now and see whether according to her cry, which has come to me, they have done. Oh, I read that. I will wreak destruction upon them, and if not, I will know. And the men turned from there and went to Sodom, and Abraham was still standing before the Lord. Who was those men? Does anyone know? Who are the men who came to visit Abraham in the previous chapter? Exactly, the three angels who looked like men, but they were messengers of God, right? And they're like God's ambassadors, right? They went and they promised Abraham and Sarah that they shall have this miraculous son, which was, biologically impossible, but yet it happened, right? Because of how old they were. And then after they were done with that job, the ambassadors, they go where? To Sodom to check what the situation there is, right? And Abraham was still standing before the Lord. Now, what does that mean that he was standing before the Lord? What does it mean? Right? Was he praying? Was the Lord actually there? But the people left, so it's not clear exactly. Is it literally? Maybe if you read a few verses down, you'll see you might see some insinuation as to what that was. Was he imagining God? Was he dreaming about God? Was maybe one of the people stayed and the others went to Sodom? It might be because here there were three, and when they go in Sodom, there's only two of them, as far as I remember. So possibly one of them stayed. Not clear. We don't know. Let's read a little more. And then comes our story here. And Abraham approached and said, "Will you even destroy the righteous with the wicked?" Ha'af tispet tzadikim rasha, that I'm saying it in Hebrew because it's a very famous verse that people say. Ha'af tispet tzadikim rasha, will you even destroy the righteous with the wicked? In other words, God is planning on doing what we might call today collective punishment. Right? Basically wiping out the entire city of Sodom. Just a moment, Herb. Okay? And Abraham here, it's a very famous story, starts to negotiate with God. But what about the righteous ones in the city? Do we kill them too now that I'm here with you in this? I know your plans, right? I'm sitting in the Pentagon, right? With all the generals. We're going to drop that bomb, right? Are we now going to, but what about those who aren't wicked in Sodom? Will they also be wiped out? Says Abraham, to whom? To the all-merciful God, who just wants to wipe them all out, right? Let's read a little more. Save your questions for a second. I want us to get the context and then. So just remember your questions or comments. Perhaps there are 50 righteous men in the midst of the city. Will you even destroy and not forgive the place for the sake of the 50 righteous men who are in its midst? If we can find 50 righteous people in the city, will we spare the city? Far be it from you to do a thing such as this, to put to death the righteous with the wicked, so that the righteous should be like the wicked. Far be it from you, says Abraham to God. Will the judge of the entire earth not perform justice? Look at that confrontational guy. He just got a promotion. You brought him in. Look what he's doing to God, right? He's saying to him, you are the, right? You're the judge of the entire earth. Will you not perform justice? Interesting. Abraham knows he knows what's justice, right? And he is telling God, don't destroy the city. And the Lord said, if I find in Sodom 50 righteous men within the city, I will forgive the entire place for their sake. We didn't think about it first. You need Abraham for that, but he was convinced. And Abraham answered and said, behold, now I have commenced to speak to the Lord, although I am dust and ashes. He admits that he's, not worthy, but he will still do the haggling, right? And he continued further to speak to him and said, perhaps 40 will be found there? And he said, I will not do it for the sake of 40. In other words, they didn't find 50 righteous people in Sodom, right? So then he keeps haggling because he wants to save the city. Now, by the way, the people of Sodom weren't Jewish, and they were sinners. They were terrible sinners. Okay? Yet, what is Abraham's agenda? What does he want to do? Save them. What does God want to do? Destroy them. That's the haggling. That's the question. How many righteous people does it take, not to change a light bulb, but to save the city? Right? If the entire city is corrupt, right? If the entire city is corrupt and sinful, and you want me to destroy it, what is the number? What is the number that justifies not destroying it all? That is what the conversation is about. Right, we get to it eventually. Right, and he continued further to speak to him and says, perhaps 40, and then he said to them, verse 30, and he said, please let the Lord's wrath not be kindled, and I will speak. Perhaps 30 will be found there. And he said, I will not do it if I find 30 there. And he said, behold, now I have desired to speak to the Lord. Perhaps 20 will be found there. And he said, I will not destroy for the sake of 20. And he said, please let the Lord's wrath not be kindled. I will speak, yes, this time. Perhaps 10 will be found there. And he said, I will not destroy it for the sake of the 10. And the Lord departed when he finished speaking to Abraham. And Abraham returned to his place. Now, remember when I told you how this conversation is going? What do we learn from verse 33? And the Lord departed when he finished speaking with him, to Abraham. And Abraham returned to his place. How do you, what's that? What kind of God was there? What does it sound like? No, but in a very kind of physical, you see what I'm asking? Is it, when it said the Lord departed? Yeah. If literally, of course we can also, maybe it was a spiritual thing. God, so what is it? God that comes down from the heaven like in a little cloud, or like in a Tesla? You know what I mean? And then they have this conversation, and then it's like, oh well, I guess we didn't find 10 people. I have to go destroy Sodom now. And he goes back to the Tesla. Or is it like a spirit? You see what I mean? Oh, right. You don't like Teslas. I remember we had. So another in a ragged old Volkswagen, whatever. I'm just thinking something that doesn't make a lot of noise, right? Like your car also, it's pretty quiet. It's a different make. Can God be in a Chinese car though? I'm not sure. That's a good question. You see what I mean? It's really not like how do we imagine this conversation, like this God here? Is it something that that Abraham dreamt about? That he had a vision? Is God here like actually a character that comes and goes? He goes, right? It's interesting. But let's go back to the main issue. This is a very, very, very central text in our theology and in Jewish ethics and philosophy. It's actually very awkward, right? There's like this negotiation between God and man. God is the one who actually wants to destroy the people of Sodom because they're sinners. He wants justice. Right? Yet Abraham argues with God, confronts God, haggles with God for the sake of saving those heathen sinners. All right. I have a few things to say about it, but let's now it's time to hear some comments and questions. Let's start here and go systematically. If Herb wants to start or whatever, you already have the mic, and so we'll go this way and that way.
I have a simple question.
Uh-oh.
God destroyed the world with Noah, but rules weren't set down until Exodus, and all of the laws weren't set down until Leviticus. So how did the people of Sodom and Gomorrah know they were doing something wrong? There were no rules. Especially when it came, we had spoken about this before, but the Hebrews were the first and only one of two nations that actually had rules concerning sexuality. So what reasoning did God have to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah when these people didn't even know there were rules that they had to abide by?
Now you're a good lawyer, right? Okay, first of all, who said that God needs, justifications to doing whatever? God can do whatever. It's God. Okay, that's one thing. Then also an excellent question, right? And also, how they say that not knowing the law does not exclude someone from. If you get caught, you can't go to court and say I did not know that stealing is bad, right? I'm not holding a court of law, as far as I know, right? And actually the thing that we're doing, which is basically raping everybody that moves, right? Like, hey, that's pretty clear that it's bad. Right? Sorry for bringing that topic in such a casual way. It's not. It's a very serious matter. But okay, they were doing very, very bad things, and basically the rabbis also in other midrash. Sometimes we can learn about the different midrashim of how bad and terrible the people of Sodom were. They're like fairy tales upon fairy tales upon fairy tales that they're really elaborated upon. But that's a great question. And again, and by the way, Reform Judaism. Right? We also don't. It's a little more like Reformed than Orthodox. In other words, there are no exact rules of like there isn't a manual. Yet we still think that we can tell right from wrong and understand what God wants from us, even though the rules sometimes aren't as clear as we'd like them to be. Yes.
Sorry, I moved over here to make it easier.
Oh, you're confusing us.
I was trying to make it
Yeah.
simpler. Is this where we get a minion from?
Yes.
The first time?
Right. So yeah. So when people are this idea that the 10 people make a minion, right? Everybody knows what a minion is. It's like you can't certain prayers when you want to pray in public, you need 10 people. That is the rule that they derive when they give a justification to 10, because there were actually other customs that said that it should be 7. The ancient custom in the land of Israel was that 7 is enough for a minyan. And I always joked and I'd say this because in Israel back then it was hard to get 10 people for a minyan, right? Because everybody breaks off and starts their own synagogue and are just lazy and don't want to come, right? So 10 is from that. This is what they give, and it also kind of like another building on that. One way to read the story, which may not be the main thing, but is to also think that if you feel like your society is falling apart and isn't following the values that you'd like them to, in other words, like that we're becoming like Sodom here, which I don't think we are, but if you have this idea that the society around you is very bad and corrupt and unethical, etc., the importance of having a small group of people, okay, a community, 10, 500, 1,000, whatever it is, right, a community that if they exist in the city will not be destroyed. You see what I mean? Which I think is the deep sense of having a minyan, or having a kehillah, right? That sometimes you say, well, the city around me, the town around me, the society around me, the country around me is going in a bad direction. And maybe I'll say it kind of explicitly, maybe I can't win the general vote at this point in time, yet all you need is a small group of people that's strong enough to carry through the bad times to the, in other words, you see what I mean? That's another I think, relevant way to read this story. So the minyan is not just a technical thing of how many, if we can say Kaddish or not, or Baruch. It's about having that community that is strong enough, a body of people that is strong enough to withhold the bad times, right? Sometimes even a smaller group, a dedicated group in a vast majority can make the difference. That's another thing that we learn from this story. Yeah.
I think you might have just answered the question I was about to ask. From a dramatic perspective, this story is weirdly kind of anticlimactic at the end. Abraham has to negotiate against the Almighty. How many people to save the city? 50, then 45, 40. Gets it all the way down to 10. And then, what, four verses later, it turns out the number's 0. And there wasn't any one there, it didn't matter what number he had come down to. So why the negotiation up front when it's...
Well, that's, in the end, there weren't 10 people, right? In the end, they only found like one family that also happened to have been Abraham's, relative, Lot, which also might explain why it was so important to Abraham to save the city, because I think it was his nephew who lived there with his family. And in the end, what happened is that when the men came to destroy Sodom, right? They saved Lot and by the way, not all of his family. They were able to save him. In other words, once it was clear that the city is going to be destroyed, in chapter 19, which we're not going to read now, the story continues. Once it was determined the city will be destroyed, let's try to save those who are, the people who are what's the term in English? Civilians, the uninvolved civilians, which was Lot and his family. Even the ones who were married to this locals remained. And then Lot managed to escape with 2 of his daughters, and his wife. What happened to his wife? She turned around and basically was not saved, right? Because she was too attached to that place, so to speak, right? So very little people were saved in the end. And yes, the whole thing is catastrophic and anticlimactic, because you would hope, right, that Abraham would be able to save the city, or at least the ones who were the uninvolved civilians. Turned out that there were no uninvolved civilians, and that the city was destroyed. And is it anticlimactic? Yes, the world that we live in is a terrible place, and very terrible things happen. It's an anticlimactic world, not just a story. I agree with you, unfortunately. Yes?
So it seems like Abraham wanted to save everybody, but then as he's negotiating, it's like he's unsure of himself being able to find those people. Does that do you see it the same way? Like Abraham's doubting himself to be able to find anybody? Is that why he's negotiating?
Who's the one who couldn't find? Is it Abraham or is it God, in your opinion?
Both. Either or. He's negotiating, and God's allowing him to negotiate.
Mm-hmm.
So, if God is all-knowing and all-powerful, and he knows Abraham's trying to negotiate with him, and he's allowing it, so does God see that Abraham is doubtful even in himself, and yet he is trying to help the people? Possibly.
It's a nice way to, I like your angle on it. It's nice, right? And what's really interesting to me with what you're saying is it's kind of like it's a debate, but it's not an equal debate, because God knows that there's no uninvolved civilians, that the city will be destroyed. Yet, according to your interpretation, that's the beautiful thing about Midrash. We can take it anyway, according to your creative interpretation, and it's very interesting. God knows what it's going to be. Yet, he lets Abraham do the haggling. Maybe that's what he was expected to do. Maybe that's something that we need to learn from Abraham and from God, according to your very good, interesting interpretation. Right? That what we're expected to do is to haggle and negotiate and try to save the people, even when they don't even deserve it. Like to what extent shall we make the effort to save the people? According to this story, to a great extent. Will it always succeed? Will we always succeed to prevent the punishment? Probably not. But is it our moral imperative to go to great extent to do that? Yes. Wait, who has the microphone? I don't know. I don't make the rules here. You guys just. Oh. You...
And they dress according to Esther.
But which Esther?
Queen Esther. Many. I like the feeling that God needs man, and God without man is. There have been things I've read that God is lonely if people do not, reach out and communicate. So I see an implication that God needs man, or to be God, people need to, someone finish that sentence for me.
Without man, there's no God. Without God, there's no man.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's the bread and Torah things, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a holy conversation, and God, according to your line of thought, which is also deeply rooted in Jewish tradition, mitzvah, the word mitzvah, commandment, comes from the same root of tzevet, tzavta, which in Hebrew means partnership, companionship. A Hasidic interpretation of what is a mitzvah is that when we do a mitzvah, we partner with God in doing something in the world, right? So God needs partners, apparently, right? I think, so I try to complete your sentence, but, okay. Mm-hmm. No? No? No, when you finish with the mic, don't turn it off.
Now it's better.
Now it's better,
so,
yes.
My question goes to the story of creation. And I have this question for a long, long time, and maybe you can answer it for me. So, we know that God doesn't have image, doesn't have race, doesn't have gender, doesn't have something. At the same time, we know that God created the first man from dust and ashes according to his image. So the first man, Adam, was a white male. Doesn't it mean that God was a white man? We don't know that.
Yeah, so there's a lot of assumptions that I'm hearing in you that I'm not sure that they're the only way to interpret things. For the first part, and I'm repeating something that I've repeated before, God in the biblical God is not necessarily without image and without form. Actually, it's pretty clear that God in the Bible is very much with image and form. And it's only much later in the Middle Ages, or maybe it depends, but much later than biblical times that we see that God is without shape and form. Again, in the biblical God is very much with shape, form, emotions, anger, thoughts. Okay, so,
He looks like a man?
well, I don't know if like a man necessarily, but like a human being. The other thing is, I don't know any verse in the Bible that says that God was a white man. That Adam was white, right? And in fact, there's two stories of creation, Genesis 1 and 2. According to one of them, the Adam was actually Adam and Eve. They were created together, and only afterwards they were kind of like dissected in the middle. And according to another story of creation, first was the male, then was the female. So you can choose which one you prefer. Okay, so a lot of those things that you're saying are not exactly accurate to biblical sources. What we have, and I also want to go back to our story, and a lot of that you could study in Rochester if you come on Wednesdays, when we talk about Kabbalah and Genesis. But what's very interesting for us is that sometimes we're taught things that God doesn't have shape and form in the Bible. But it's actually not true. It's a later interpretation that people impose in the Bible because it's something they thought was more evolved So, and for sure it doesn't say anywhere the skin color of Adam and Eve. For all I know, they were in Africa and they were, darker than me. Okay, so who knows, really? Maybe they were purple. Who knows, right? Yes, anyone else? But thank you for your comment. All the comments are relevant and interesting. Anyone else? So let's move with this, let's kind of like go this way and then come back to her. Because I know that over there people really wanted to ask questions, so.
Why did God stop at 10?
Because well, both of them stopped at 10 because, and this is what we learned from the stories, that less than 10 is not a minion. In other words, that is, from this story we learn that 10 is a defining number. In other words, there has to be a certain critical mass that protects the greater crowd. Lower than 10 is already not a group that God can apparently feel justified to not destroy the entire city for. Why 10? I don't know, but that's the story that maybe 10 digits, says Fred, who can't speak, but but can play with his fingers, which explains why you need 10 fingers to make music, right? Not just 10 people to save the city, 10 digits to play piano. Okay, yes.
But, this reminds me of my husband that says, I don't want to talk about it anymore. I mean, at the end, it's like, I'm done with you.
Mm-hmm.
We got down to 10. But isn't the lesson really about the dignity of human life and the importance of saving the righteous? So that stopping at 10 is a little bit, I don't know how we explain that. But what I really wanted to say is that the lesson, the relevance of this passage today, right now, for me, was to think about mass deportation and to think about the fact that someone who feels he has godlike powers is going to sweep out people, and starting with criminals, of whom there are probably about 5.5, and then everyone else has got to go too. So maybe we can be that righteous, that core, that type.
So can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, so I've heard over the years that there's two faces to God. Can you put it closer to
Closer to your mouth.
Is that better?
No, it's off.
Oh, is it off? Is that better?
Yes.
Okay. So I've heard over the years that there's two faces to God.
Closer.
There's two faces to God. One is a very kind God. We pray to him for miracles and when they come true. But then there's a very, very evil God, like the destruction here. What is that true? Is that a true commentary?
Yeah, well, I'll start with the end of your question. When he asks, even the rabbi, is that true?
Yeah.
Right? Like, true according to who? According to what? According to science? According to what? There's so many, even within Judaism, there's so many different streams and schools of thought. But I will say this, that, and that's also relevant, by the way, to the idea of monotheism, and why and you see, because in non-monotheistic systems, you just have different gods, right? Like if you think about, like in India, you have Shiva, Vishnu, and Brahma, the creator, the destroyer, and the protector, right? So different gods. So you see, so one god will be the destroyer, one of them will be the protector, one of them will be the creator, and depending on what you want, if you want to destroy your enemy, you'll invoke that god. If you want to protect your tribe, you'll invoke that god. If you want to. By the way, in India too, they believe that on a deeper level, all those gods are one and the same, and they all are just different attributes of the same. So in a sense, they're also monotheistic. The thing with monotheism is that it always tries to have one God, and it always never exactly succeeds. Because what can we do? Our human experience teaches us that actually, the powers that run the world are very, like, they're very different and sometimes opposite. Which is why you kind of import ideas from the non-monotheistic beliefs into your monotheism. Right? And a very famous example for that is Catholicism, where God is one, but it's actually three. Right? Because they realize that you can't just think about God, for example, without thinking about, there has to be a Mary, there has to be like a feminine thing. Right? Similarly in Judaism, specifically in Kabbalah, right? They say actually God is actually, it's one, but it's actually 10. Going back to that mysterious number 10 again. And there's an attribute that is masculine, and there's an attribute that's feminine. There's an attribute that, and you're talking about compassion and judgment, right? The different, the idea that God can sometimes be, that's typically in Kabbalah, it's the right and the left side. Because the right is where you have the sword, and the left is where you hold your shield. Okay, there's different sides to that. And then God can either be the compassionate one, and God can be the God of judgment. And often we struggle with that because we're made to think that God will be the compassionate one, right? God is compassionate. God will save us. But what if God is actually showing us judgment? Can we also, like when tough things happen in the world to us, can we accept that it is also from God? That we're being taught a lesson? Right? Sometimes it doesn't co-align with all our, reform kind of fluffy ways. You know what I mean? But in deepness, to believe that God is one means that when we feel the compassion of God, we say, "Oh, thank God for that." But when we feel the judgment, the harsh, the rough part of the aspects of attribute of God, are we also brave enough, or are we also willing to say, this is also coming from God in a very, very mysterious way that maybe we can't understand? Maybe this story is about that. It actually is about that, right? It's about God and Abraham, right? A kind of like compassion impersonated by Abraham, and judgment impersonated by God, right? And that's the debate. It's the moral debate. Do we punish our criminals, or do we try to release them? And right? Is death penalty a good idea, or is it not? Or okay, what if there's war and there's a city of enemies? When is it okay and justified to bomb that city? And when is it, oh, there's too many uninvolved civilians, let's not do it? But hey, there are terrorists there. So what's the right decision? See what I mean? This story, by the way, in Kabbalah, Abraham personifies compassion. Always. He because of that story, among other things. He is the person who tried to withstand the judgment, the fierce attribute of God. God was correct in the sense that those people were very, very bad and evil. And everybody there, except for one guy, was a bad person. Okay? So God was justified, maybe, in wanting to destroy it, but God's compassion, and Abraham says, so that thing that you're portraying is actually a very, very, I think, profound reading of this story. Thank you for bringing it up. Yeah, where is the microphone?
I have about 10 different things I wanted to comment on, but I'm going to go back to the very beginning of what you said, which was Abraham and God being besties, and that Abraham discovered God. That was what you said. And in doing so became his mouthpiece to the rest of the people. I always saw it as God finding Abraham as opposed to Abraham finding God. That God needed Abraham. He needed a person to be his mouthpiece. And so by coming to Abraham and saying, hey, I'm really here, that's how the relationship began. And then I agree with what you were just saying about Abraham being the more compassionate side, or the alter ego of God, the part that had to argue with him.
Yeah, and it's fascinating that they put the person in that role, because usually you think that it's the other way, might be the other way around. That thing about who discovered who is a fascinating question, because according to the literal text, it was God who told Abraham. But hey, it takes two to tango. You know, maybe God speaks to everybody, right? But only Abraham listened. You know, maybe God tells all of us, Lech Lecha, go forth, believe, be a blessing, na. It takes one to know one. It takes one with the ears to hear the calling. You know, so in this way, it has to be at least a two-way direction. And indeed, in many different streams of interpretation throughout the millennia, okay, try to explain what was it in Abraham, what qualities did he have that made him the good candidate for God choosing him, and often it is because he was one who chose God back. Okay? Oh, we're finally back to you, can't escape it. You're very strategically situated in the middle.
Lots of people say that about me.
Well, most of them are in the spot, the JCC, right?
In any case, I always found this interesting, this story. We're talking about Abraham, who was in previous passages known to give Sarah, who is supposedly thought to be actually his actual half-sister, to the Pharaoh and to another king, to the point where there are some scholars who believe Isaac may not be Abraham's son, but the king who he gave him to.
Uh-oh.
Right? Okay, but we're talking about a story of morality here with Sodom and Gomorrah. So God chooses Abraham and Lot to speak to and send angels to. Very rare. Not everybody gets to speak to an angel. You have to be special. So he chooses him even though Abraham is not perfect. And then as we go on in the story, God destroys Sodom and Gomorrah and picks a family, Lot's family, to save. But on the way out, Lot's wife becomes unsavable because she sins by turning around. And then we have Lot and his daughters in the story committing incest. And we're a nation based, on this lineage. So how do you explain, if God could see in the future, why he picked these people, if he knew that they were going to sin, or what is the interpretation of sinning, or is God basically saying, well, if I like you, you can do some things, but if I don't like you, you can't do them.
Well, I'm not God's spokesman, I can't really speak for God. It's a fascinating question of free will and God being omni, all-knowing, all-powerful. Why then does God let us sin? Why does right? One of them, and it's a kind of one of those fascinating paradoxes, right? We are taught in many texts that we are given choice. And that even though God may know everything, God doesn't know which way we're going to turn. So, and if we don't, because if there's no choice, there's almost no point of being sinners, right? I see the people in the room starting to move, which means that we have 5 more minutes, okay? So those of you who can wait 5 more minutes, let's just take final comments, and then we'll wrap it up because it's time.
So instead of seeing it as a story about God, it's in some ways a story about Abraham, and he's the proxy for humanity in these. It's hard with a modern eye not to see Abraham's actions in negotiating down the number. It's kind of a noble action. He's not doing it for himself or even apparently for his family. He's doing this for others. In several of the other Abraham stories, it's much more a statement of just faith and believing that it will turn out right. In the sacrifice of Isaac, there's not this negotiation. He picks up the knife.
Yeah.
So is there something to? Why is Abraham moved in this case to negotiate with the Almighty?
The interesting thing that you're depicting is that the story of the Akedah happens right after this. Okay, so it's almost like the way that I see it is that, again, Abraham is making radical experiments. Vroom, vroom. You see what he does? He goes in this story, he kind of like tries to go take the side of compassion all the way to the end, to let's say to the right side, right? And he kind of puts himself on the compassionate side of God, being a radical hippie. Okay, so he's saying, oh, don't kill anyone. They're all those sinners. They're such, well, they just had a rough childhood. That's why they're rapists. Like really, release all the whatever. No punishments, no prisons. Imagine there's no country. Let's smoke a joint. World peace. Everything's perfect. There's no bad people in the world. Right? He's basically taking this stance, right? Which kind of might explain why in the next chapter, right, when God tells him, okay, you learned that lesson. Now go kill your son. And he kind of said, now I'm going to go to the other side. Whatever God tells me, I must do. Never mind, I'll even kill my own son, right? It's kind of like you can just kind of see the stories of Genesis. It's kind of like, again, to take another 1,000 years for the laws of Moses to come. Right? Abraham, again, discovered God, invented God, was discovered by God, whatever. And he has to really research it from all directions because he doesn't have a Torah to learn from. He doesn't have 3,000 years of ethics and morality and history that we have, even though it doesn't help us because we're still pretty messed up. Okay, but he doesn't have everything that we have. He has to reinvent the wheel. He has to reinvent morality, which is why he goes to one extreme, one chapter, the next chapter, right? First he's trying to save the world. The next day he's sacrificing his son, right? He's investigating the relationship with that God from all different directions. Yes? Oh, someone wants to speak. Shall we let them?
Yes.
Okay, what's the question on Zoom?
The question is about the term sodomite that people use against LGBT people, and it's come from this Parshat.
Yes.
With it.
So if you go to in chapter 18, it did not convey what were the sins of Sodom. If you go to chapter 19, you learn that a lot of their sins had to do with sexual misbehavior and wanting to basically, like their way to treat the two men who came, the guests, was all the people of Sodom. They came to Lot's house, the two angels, and God and the people of Sodom came about and said to Lot, bring out your guests, we want to rape them. We want to know them in biblical, okay? This is where sodomy comes from. Okay? And then Lot said, take because Lot was true to the value of hospitality. He said, take my daughters and don't do anything to my guests. Kind of a horrible thing, right? And the people of Sodom said, we don't care about your daughters, we want your guests. And then those because they were angels of God, they hit the eyes of those people with a great light, and they were blinded, and then they took Lot and okay, they didn't know that they were messing with the wrong people. But this is where sodomy comes from. It's the sin of, by the way, forced intercourse between men, not if it's out of consent and love, then that's not necessarily a sin. But here the problem was not that there were men, it's that they were trying to force them. That was the problem. That was the sin. By the way, a very important distinction. Right? So according to this story, at least, there are other parts in the Bible where according to this story, the problem was not at all that there was men involved, is that it was unwilling, not non-consensual. That was the terrible sin, which God can't tolerate and destroys. Okay? All right. Thank you for speaking for the nation of the Zoom people on behalf of them, representing them, Nachum. I appreciate the question. So we kind of have to wrap up. I know that there's, like you said, there's 9 more questions, not right, but that's the. Thank you all very much for this kind of engaged, kind of informal discussion. Enjoyed your questions, your comments, and next week I'll have to confirm with her, but we're going to have Rabbi Dror Seto of Temple Emmanuel, who will teach us about feminist aspects of Judaism, because it's Parshat Chayei Sarah. So you're invited to join, and hopefully that'll be a fascinating discussion. Au revoir, hasta la vista. Have a great week.